Hello everyone, welcome to this platform of Karnataka LMS. I'm Vinay M S, Assistant Professor of English at Govt First Grade College Siddakatte. In this video, I'm going to discuss the poem Door Beach by Mathew Arnold, a critical assessment of the poem. Already in this series, we have discussed in part first the stanza-wise explanation of the poem Door Beach. In the part second, we went to literary elements of the poem, including its theme, setting, and literary devices or figures of speech used in the poem. In this poem, let's attempt a critical assessment of every stanza of the poem. Okay. So before going to the discussion of today's video, let me just make a recapitulation of the things we have finished so far. Yeah, when we come to the thing, the structure of the poem is a dramatic monologue in 4 stanzas with unequal lines. This we saw in the last videos, that lines, maybe the example of the first 2 lines I gave in the last video, tell you that the first line has got only 3 feet, iambic feet, whereas again the fourth one has second line has 4 iambic feet. So you can see a kind of different length lines in each stanzas. Again, these rather I can say very disorganized structure. It doesn't mean that I'm not nice, I'm telling you negatively, but the very different structure of the poem can also say a kind of a chaotic situation of the world. The poem expresses, therefore, the author's, Arnold's, frustration and hopelessness of the modern chaotic world. He is not happy with the developments during the 1850s, the aftermath of industrial revolution and the advancement in science and technology has brought in a lot of changes in the society. Of course, there were desirable changes, but some of the things which were leading to the diminishing or towards the reducing quality of Victorian society made him write this poem. The particular thing that he notices there is loss of faith in terms of both the loss of religious faith and loss of faith among human beings, and it finally led to melancholy which was widespread during the era. Therefore, the theme of the poem was loss of faith. And he also focuses on man-nature relationship, because it was a Victorian period was a continuation of, or rather I can say it's the next era in English literature after the Romantic period. So Romantic period carried its focus on the man-nature relationship. The impact of the thoughts of poets of Romantic era like Wordsworth, or even the younger generation, or Shelley, Keats, Byron, all these all their thoughts influenced the writers of Victorian era too. Arnold was influenced by William Wordsworth, and we find his focus on man-nature relationship. And the poem opens with the description of the nature, for that matter, you can see, and then it comes to the discussion of human nature. So therefore, man-nature relationship is another theme. And then the most important again is the theme of love. And he considers that as love as a solution or palliative to the situation which was very chaotic during that era. Therefore, he calls his beloved who was with him to, oh love, let's be true to each other. Here it becomes clear that he finds that that is the one way it is possible to find some solution. Though maybe very pessimistic view is presented in some part of the poem, still he is optimistic that that love can make life sustain. The situation can be resumed by using love. Then we went to poetic devices, the discussion of poetic devices like symbols, images, and figures of speech like metaphor, simile, anaphora, even we discussed in the last part. Now let's go to the stanza-wise critical assessment in this video. In the first stanza, when we take up the discussion of the first stanza, you see that the very first stanza is resembling a sonnet. There are two types of sonnets, Petrarchan and Shakespearean. In the Petrarchan sonnet, you have first octave and then the sestet. The 6 lines are sestet, and the first 8 lines are octave. 8 octa means ashta, 8 octa. So the last 6 lines in the poem take a kind of turn in tone. This is usual nature of Petrarchan sonnet. Whereas in case of Shakespearean sonnet, it is 4 quatrains, then a couplet, right? So I'm sorry, 3 quatrains and a couplet, isn't it? That is the nature. But you here see Petrarchan structure, Petrarchan sonnet structure, where the 8 lines, that is the line number, the sea is calm to, first line, to till the line where the sea meets the moon blanched land, it has one kind of tone. Okay, that means a very positive side, a very happy, pleasant description of nature, the beauty of nature. And in the line number 9, listen, you hear the grating roar. You see the line number 9, sudden change in the tone. Tone changes from pleasant to unpleasant, peaceful to disturbance. That is what the change in the tone here. Listen, he says, you hear the grating roar. What kind of grating roar is used here? That begins the change, shift in the tone of the poem. And then that's why you see the first part of the poem resembles sonnet. The 6 lines later on carrying something else. The first 8 lines describe the nature, whereas the next 6 line introduces the other side of the nature, that is the negative side of the nature, because you see a kind of disturbance in nature, the disturbed condition within the nature, right? That is described in the next 6 line. Yeah, in first 8 lines, you see it opens with a very vivid description of a beach near Dover in the south coast of England. It's the coast which is between even the French and English territory. And you see a kind of romantic poet's approach to nature, because he describes every aspect there. He observes the sea which is calm that night, the tide which is full, and the moon who is fair. Right? So then he also see a light gleaming, and tranquility of the bay is observed. All these are the romantic poet's observation that you can see in Arnold here. So a pleasant appearance of the beauty of the nature from a very distant view can be observed in the first opening stanza, and that is observed from a window view, right? So that a distant view observation of the nature was brought in the first 8 lines. Then he approaches closely to it, and as he goes close to that, he finds there a kind of eternal note of sadness, because he observes the kind of tremulous cadence there. Tremulous means moving, right? Trembling, right? That has got trembling, shaking, shivering, a cadence. That the movement of the wave tells him or shows him a kind of fear, right? Again, it expresses a kind of eternal sadness, never-ending sadness, because that moment of wave sea, it was there for ages, and then that he locates from the next stanza using Sophocles, what we saw. So anyhow, you see contrasting, another important element is in this part of the first stanza, he contrasts the French coast with the English one. But also interesting to observe that, it is also interesting to observe that he finds the stability in the cliff of England. He finds a kind of loss of stability or disappearance of light in the French coast, because it gleams and disappears, right? Light in the French coast gleams, it shines for a while and then disappears. And that shining and disappearing in the French coast is in clear contrast with the stability in the English coast through the symbol of the cliff of England. The cliff of England indicating the English empire then, which was stable, which was almost stable during the Victorian era, right? So whereas the disturbance in the French is observed here, saying that it is disappearing. A contrast is brought between the two nations or two empires, two kingdoms, also through the example or symbol of the cliff of England. And then we see a, a kind of pleasant weave is introduced, therefore, throughout the first stanza, isn't it? A kind of pleasant weave is introduced, and towards the end of the first stanza, he brought in the melancholic part of it. This overall, you can see another element again. The overall stanza contrasts both the pleasant side of nature and again the negative or unpleasant side of human nature. ಎರಡನ್ನೂ ಕೂಡ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತದೆ. ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಸ್ಟ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು? ನಿಮಗೆ ಒಂದು ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ, ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ an image. Say in this slide, for example, I have a background slide and front on slide ಇದೆ, or any image for that matter. If you have a background and outside there is one image, a photograph for example, if both have the same color, can you see the image pasted on the background appear clearly? No, there should be a contrast. Similar technique is used in the first stanza. There contrast is brought. The very positive side is presented in the beginning, and then the negative side, I mean the other side, is brought. Thereby he highlights that melancholic part of the word by using by placing it in front of the pleasant side. It highlights over that pleasant side. But we observe here that he balances both in the first stanza, and he continues to balance that the pleasant and unpleasant side of nature and human nature throughout the poem. Yeah, let's move on to stanza 2, critical assessment stanza 2. First stanza itself finds the sadness lies within the beauty of nature, right? He finds sadness in the beauty of nature itself. Yeah, because in the opening part of the stanza, we find the beauty of nature. He describes the way tide is calm that night, the sea is calm that night, and the way moon is fair, the color fair is used there, and tide is full, or even tranquility was there. Sweet is the night air, right? You can see sweet is the night air, right there. All the image, that visual imagery, the visual you can visualize a very pleasant atmosphere. So therefore he uses perception of the change from calmness to uproar from line number 8 to line number 9, that you can observe, right? So he finds a kind of change. Calm sea now turns to uproar, disturbance, right? So through that uproar he finds eternal note of sadness, and that is found out through the waves moving the pebbles back and forth in its tremulous cadence. Trembling or shivering cadence is a kind of rhythm. ಅದು ಒಂದು ಹಿಂದೆ ಮುಂದೆ ವೇವ್ ಮೂವ್ ಆಗುವಂಥ ರಿದಮ್ ಏನಿದೆ, ಥ್ರೂ ದಟ್ ಹಿ ಫೈಂಡ್ಸ್ ದಟ್ tremulous shivering cadence. What you observe here is the word cadence is very important, because the poem has a kind of rhythm, right? A music lyric, it's a lyric, right? Lyric ಅಂತಾರೆ, ಭಾವಗೀತೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಲಿರಿಕ್ ಅಂತೀವಿ, ಹೌದಾ? ಸೊ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಎ ಕೈಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಲಿರಿಕ್. A lyric has got a rhythm. The poem also has got a rhythm, and that rhythm is even indicated in the line through the rhythm of pebble moving back and forth. But it was a tremulous cadence. But the tremulous cadence is taken as an image for showing eternal note of sadness. He considers that as an eternal note of sadness. So it's a situation where he marks an era of turmoil due to the transition in faith. Therefore, he considers that eternal note of sadness is the result of transition in faith. Loss of faith is the reason. That's what he finds there. And a critique of a very shift, a paradigm shift in the very structure of society caused by the rapid industrialization and radical scientific discoveries is used indicated here. Yeah, it's interesting to note that I think I mentioned one in the last discussion also, in the last video discussion. Yeah, for example, if you go to Alfred Nobel's story, he invented dynamite. Dynamite was invented with the purpose of using it for a positive things. I mean, maybe for example, to break a rock. Yeah, if you want to construct a house somewhere, you need dynamite. But to the misfortune, I think I can say so, Alfred Nobel found that the dynamite was also used for destroying purpose, not just destroying for a constructive reason, but for destroying for spoiling society, as a bomb or something like that. When he found sadness was produced out of dynamite, I mean murder and killings or mass destruction of human life started using dynamite, he was very disappointed with that. I don't know whether it is true or not, but I have heard a story that Alfred Nobel, out of his patent of dynamite, earned a lot of wealth, but at the end he kept all the entire wealth for awarding Nobel Prize, say claiming that that wealth did not give him happiness, because even dynamite was used for destructive purpose. This may be a story which I heard from my teacher in my class. Still, you observe its relevance to this context here, that a kind of shift in the rapid industrialization and radical scientific discoveries also caused some darker side or dark results, like destruction, loss of faith, all these things. And he's not happy with that part of development. Okay, anyhow, let's move on to next part. Yeah, in the second stanza you see the tone of melancholy, a melancholic tone continues, because he opens there that the claims of sadness, which was eternal in the last, ended with the last eternal note of sadness, by using the tremulous cadence. He indicated that eternal note of sadness in the last stanza. The same is continued here, because he says that is there since the age of Sophocles. He takes the shelter of Greek tragedian Sophocles to propagate his idea of that widespread or eternal and universal sadness. Because Sophocles, in one of his plays, finds that sadness in his agency, in the description of the agency, or Aegean or Mediterranean. It's a part of Mediterranean, the present day Mediterranean Sea. So there he found that the movement of the muddy water made him, conclude that eternal note of sadness. And the same sadness is now found in the tremulous cadence of the Dover Beach Sea. Therefore, what Arnold claims here, that Sophocles lived in the 5th century BC, Arnold is in the 19th century AD, and the sadness, which is eternal because it was there from the age of Sophocles to till day, ಇವತ್ತಿನವರೆಗೂ ಇದೆ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥ ಕ್ಲೈಮನ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. Therefore, it's a universal measure of humans there everywhere, and it is there for ages. ಎಟರ್ನಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಲ್. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅದು ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಡೆಯೂ ಇದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ಆದರೆ, ಯಾವತ್ತಿಗೂ ಇದೆ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥದ್ದು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಅಂಶ. ಇವೆರಡನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಅರ್ನಾಲ್ಡ್ ಹೈಲೈಟ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ದಿಸ್ ಪರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲರ್ ಪಾರ್ಟ್. And then the speaker identifies him with the classical tragedian through his note of the universal and eternal misery. This is interesting that Victorian writers had this practice of alluding to the classical writers. You see, even in the case of Alfred Tennyson, probably while reading his poems, you can see a reference goes to classical writers, Greek writers, for example, or Latin writers, right? So here Arnold also makes that alluding to the classical writers. He goes back to Sophocles for that purpose. That means they were unlike the earlier ages. In some ages you find, for example, in some ages they did not look at the past, but here the the Middle Ages, the writers of the Middle Ages, or even earlier classical writers, they become relevant to the writers of the Victorian era. They take their ideas and elaborate it also. Here you find in Arnold also, he takes the example of Sophocles for continuing his argument. Here you find one thing, dear students, that this kind of allusion, referring to some classical writer, is a kind of finding, a supportive force for his argument. That means he finds shelter, or he takes the idea of a great writer and says his thought resembles to that of that great writer, isn't it? By that he tries to persuade the readers that the thought which what he is proposing now is very relevant and effective one. And that's the technique you find here in this example also. Anyhow, then in the third stanza, you find that example of the metaphor of sea of faith. This reflects the lost unity, uniformity, harmony among human beings. The sea of faith is not actually, but loss of that faith is indicated through that the sea of faith is taken as an image to reflect that. The sea of faith which is no longer there, that is what the tone here, right? So you see the idea here is that he says that the sea of faith was once too at the full and round earth's shore, right? It was there round earth's shore, lay like a folds of a bright girdle furled, but now I only hear is its melancholy. That means it was there. The sea of faith was surrounding the world. It was a uniting force across the globe. There was uniformity, there was harmony among human beings. It was widespread. The faith referred here, right? Faith was universal. It was widespread. It was a binding force of human beings. Now that is no longer there. What has replaced it? It is melancholy, sadness that has replaced it ಅಂತ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. So declining faith and its result of increasing melancholy. Yeah, the decline in the faith is the result, is the cause for increasing melancholy. You can see the connection between both. And that retreat happens with roar and emptiness, leaving everything naked, right? So you can see that retreat happens with roaring sound. The word roar or even grating, all these are very important because they add something to the sound of rhythmic quality of the poem. So you can see that pulling back or retreat, in the sense the pulling back, going back, going to the reversing direction, that is the falling thing. That happens, that fall is happening with roar and emptiness, leaving the everything naked. The reversing or declining faith is happening with roar, lot of noise, lot of chaotic and disturbance. Probably you can see the same kind of retreat in the nature today. The declining nature, quality, condition of the nature creates a roar here and there, earthquakes or natural calamities that can make the same kind of roar everywhere, right? Anyhow, so here the poet Arnold actually presents a nostalgia over that loss of faith. He mourns over the loss of faith. He's not happy with that, and he's also filled with that sadness spread across the globe. Yes, then does not openly state, but we observe here another interesting thing, that he does not openly state that it is only religious faith. When he doesn't do that, he gives a kind of universal quality to the poem, because he doesn't limit it to any particular religion. It is even faith among the human beings. No word anywhere clearly indicate that it is the loss of faith in only Christian religion or something. Of course, it is one understood that it is a loss of faith in Christianity, but along with that, he has got a significance of applying it to loss of faith between two persons or among human beings, because that is another faith, isn't it? If you don't have that faith, sometimes even faith in oneself, that is also ನಂಬಿಕೆ, ನನ್ನಲ್ಲಿಯೇ ನನಗಿರುವಂಥ ನಂಬಿಕೆ. ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್, ಎ ಬರ್ಡ್ ವಿಚ್ ಬಿಲೀವ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ವಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಇಟ್ ಫ್ಲೈಸ್, ರೈಟ್? ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರೆ ಅದಲ್ಲೇ ಕೂತಿರುತ್ತೆ, ಅದರ ರೆಕ್ಕೆಯ ಮೇಲೆ ನಂಬಿಕೆ ಇಲ್ಲದಿದ್ದರೆ. ಸಿಮಿಲರ್ ಕೈಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಲಾಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಫೇತ್ ಈಸ್ ಅಬ್ಸರ್ವ್ಡ್ ಎವ್ರಿವೇರ್. Anyhow, then fourth stanza makes another shift in the tone from problem to solution. Yeah, you see, when the problem is presented, conflict in literature is presented in the middle of the or a body of the writing, and the writers usually find some solution also towards the end. And you find that solution here in the form of using love as a palliative to the eternal sadness. He finds that love as a binding force. Therefore, he says, "Oh, love, let's true to be one another. Let's true to one another." Right. So he says, "Oh, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new." Very positive image you find there. It is possible to find positive things in the world, and let us true to be each other. Remember, this is not just a conversation between Arnold and his beloved, and he's trying to say this to all of us. Whenever we listen to this line of Arnold, we should remember that quality of love which can bind the people together, which can wipe out many of the elements of sadness. Yeah, you see the murderers, for example. See, if they have that blossom of love in their heart, can they use their cruel act of killing somebody? That is the question, right? And therefore he's trying to foster that feeling of love among the readers and using it as an address to his beloved. Then, though the world around us is full of miseries, our solace it is being true to one another. What is the solution then? Solace or solution to it is being true to one another. ಒಬ್ರಿಗೊಬ್ರು ನಾವು ನಂಬಿಕೆಯಿಂದ ಪ್ರೀತಿಯಿಂದ ಬದುಕೋಣ ಅನ್ನುವ ಮೆಸೇಜನ್ನು ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. So therefore, at the end again, you see, he says another interesting thing here is that the last line there, the first in the last stanza, the first four lines we have very positive thing, right? To one another, for the you see, to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new. World is so various, so beautiful, so new. Again, change in the tone. Hath really neither joy nor love nor light. See, look at the comparison. So various, so beautiful, so new. Line number 4. When you come to the line number 5, you can see that in the description also the poem is available for you to refer. In the line number 5, he immediately changes it to neither joy nor love nor light. The anaphora, the first anaphora here is positive, and the next one is very negative. That means you observe contrast is used in the last stanza also, and a balance between the positive and negative side of life is brought in. Arnold makes a very balanced poem, or attempt to balance the ideas throughout the poem. Therefore, he doesn't only say the negative side, he also has positive things, a reference, and for the negative, he finds that positive as a solution. Okay, so finds the reason of reason is there at the end, that is pervading ignorance, all widespread ignorance, and its resultant is the conflict. Ignorant armies clash by night. What a wonderful line, a so powerful line, which is often quoted across the globe, where ignorant armies clash by night. It is the clash out of ignorance. Ignorant armies clash by night, right? So they are in the darkness, therefore night. In the darkness, in a life of lack of knowledge, people clash one another. If they are brought to light, I mean, if they are given the fair knowledge, they do not. Those who are ignorant in their life, they only clash. That is the thing. Thus, Arnold conclude that devoid of love and loss of faith would lead the world to darkness and sadness. Likewise, the poem finds that these two elements, that is the faith and love, can make the people united. And if the situation here is loss of faith, and he finds that being true to one another and using love as a binding force, people can still find that unity. That is what the final message of the poem. And thus the poem, Arnold's Dover Beach, is an important poem representing the trends of the Victorian age, because it was the time where the developments has brought a lot of changes in the society, developments in the science and technology, and one of the things that it had was loss of faith and loss of beliefs. So therefore he takes up that discussion. It's a representative poem for the of the Victorian era. And then another important aspect to conclude here is that the poetic genius of Mathew Arnold, his mastery and craftsmanship in poetry, is revealed in the poem through very poignant expression of his thought, along with the suitable, very apt use of poetic devices and powerful vocabulary. Thus, the poem is an excellent example of dramatic monologue, a poem of Victorian poetry too. Thank you so much for watching.